Welcome back to Scouting the Fence. I am your co-host, Hussam Patel, and today we've got a special guest. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce my other two co-hosts, Coach and Eric. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Doing well, gentlemen. Got some good dinner in me. It's been a good night. Ready to talk some Panthers, some Dolphins. A little bit more Panthers than Dolphins, considering the recent success. But hopefully the Dolphins get there.
Yeah, I'm doing well also. Looking forward to this conversation. I'm not as big of a hockey fan, not as familiar with the Panthers as I am with the Dolphins, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation and the way that, we can take some lessons from it for the Dolphins.
Yeah, today we've got a special guest, someone who's covered South Florida sports for decades and watched up close as the Florida Panthers clawed their way to a Stanley Cup title. The father of Five Reasons Sports, it's Ethan J. Skolnick. Ethan, thank you for joining us.
How old am I? Seriously, for decades, the father of, maybe the great-grandfather, twice removed. Thanks, Hussam. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's I'm old. Yeah, I covered the Dolphins in the first year. First year covering them was 97 when I was 24. And it was with Jimmy's second year, I guess. Lots of hope at that time. Not a lot of hope since that time. Covered the Wannstedt years for what they were. Covered Cam Cameron's one season. Covered Saban's both years. He MF'd me in Gatsby's. Promised he wasn't going to Alabama. So yeah, lots of good stuff has happened in the past 25 years, except winning a playoff game. So you got me. I'm old.
Yeah, for Eric and I's entire life, we have not seen a Dolphins playoff win. We're like 25, 26 around that borderline. But Coach has seen it as well, and it's been a rough 25, 26 years. So let's get right into it. The Panthers just finished a 2-year climb to the top, built through toughness, identity, culture, and some calculated risks. What did you see as the key to the Florida Panthers blueprint, Ethan?
Let's start here. What the Panthers have achieved is tougher than what the Dolphins have had to try to achieve over the past 25 years because the Dolphins were supposed to be a destination franchise. I mean, this was a franchise with tradition. The Heat built that tradition. The Dolphins had it prior to that, and they didn't cash in on it at all. And that's why when people talk about no state tax being the reason that the Panthers have had success, I'm kind of like, okay, well, wait a second. I mean, there's no state tax in Miami Gardens also, and it hasn't helped the football team at all. I think when you take a look at what the Panthers have done, a team that about 10 years ago, there was conversation about them moving out of the market because they were giving away tickets on Las Olas Boulevard for free. You could get stacks of seats. To now, you're going to have a second parade down Las Olas Beach, and there's now 3 finals appearances. And it really came with a couple of different things. One, solid ownership that was willing to spend. The Dolphins have had the willing to spend part, but they haven't necessarily hired the right people to spend it. And then you take a look at what the guy they brought in has done, Bill Zito, which is that he's basically created, and this is a Heat word typically, culture. And, we knew that word was going to come up, but the Panthers were talking about it in the locker room prior to Game 6. A.J. Greer, who came from Boston this year and is a fourth-line player, not a star, but was a contributor, and he said, look, the difference between here and everywhere else is there's an expectation level. There's an expectation that you're going to be as good as you were yesterday or maybe better, and that even after winning a championship, this team was not complacent. And so I think that was established in part by the captain, Sasha Barkov, who they signed to an 8-year contract 3 years ago. I remember going to that press conference and on the roof of one of the hotels here in Fort Lauderdale over at the Easton. And it was kind of like, okay, this is cute. I mean, they're trying to move to Lauderdale. They're building a facility across the street. But, again, this team has never won anything for a long time. Barkov's a great player, but they haven't been able to put players around him that make it work. But he was sort of the establishment of the culture. And then beyond that, they had a coaching change. There was some controversy with one of the coaches they had to let go. They had an interim coach. And even when they won the President's Trophy, and this is another contrast from the Dolphins, when they won the President's Trophy for the best team in the NHL, they made a coaching change because they didn't feel that the coach that they had could get them over the top. They didn't feel that the team was playoff tested enough or playoff tough enough. And they also traded one of their two best players at the time. You mentioned taking a risk, Hussam. They traded Jonathan Huberdeau, who was their leading scorer most of the past few years, but was not kind of the grizzled, playoff guy. Playoff hockey is different than regular season hockey. And they traded him for Matthew Tkachuk, who had an edge to him. And the rest is kind of history. They established it with Barkov and Tkachuk. They made good draft picks. They also picked up players off, like they got Gus Forsling, who may be the best defenseman in the league right now. They got him off waivers. They signed Verhaeghe, who's been one of their top playoff scorers over the past 4 years. They signed him for nothing out of Tampa. And they also took chances on guys that other teams really didn't want. They made a trade at the trade deadline this year for Seth Jones. Blackhawks fans were saying couldn't play anymore. He ended up being a first-line defenseman for the Panthers. So some of it is evaluation of talent. And then it's also sort of creating a culture and a template. And the Heat did this for years. They've gotten a little bit away from it lately. The Dolphins haven't done it at all. And I feel like if you're Steve Ross, and I said this when I was on with Alfredo the other day, when we did an OnlyFans, I think you got to be looking at this and saying, okay, wait a second. Like, why could they do this? Like, this is, a moribund franchise. Nobody cared about hockey down here, all that. They couldn't fill that place with more than 5,000 people. And now they're filling it with 15,000 people for road rallies in the arena. Okay, and I know that the ratings are not huge, and this is more of a Dolphins town, Heat town, Hurricanes town, and it's always going to stay that way. But they have given their fans something. And also, it's also good guys. They bleed for each other. They care for each other. And I just, again, if you're going to contrast that with what we've seen with the Dolphins, which is unwillingness to take the right risks, putting big decisions in the hands of people who shouldn't have those decisions, staying with those people way too long when they make the wrong decisions, and also having a clubhouse atmosphere that's, it's kind of doesn't seem to be a whole lot of respect for being meetings on time or the coach or any of that kind of stuff. This is what you get. And I think if you're Ross, you got to be looking at this and saying, I mean, I've been trying for when did he take over? 2007, 8? What was it? Like around that? Well, Parcells, right? So there was a 9?
Around the 08-09 season, I believe.
08-09. Like, and why have I not? I've spent money. I've invested. The tennis tournament works. The F1 works. All this other stuff works. I can't get this thing to work. Well, I hate to say it. There's one consistent variable in all this time, and it's the guy who's picking the players. And yet he keeps staying with the same guy. And Bill, if I'm looking at Bill Zito, and then I'm looking at the previous track record of Riley Ellisberg and all them with the Heat, and then I'm saying, okay, what are we doing during this period of time? I got to have some questions if I'm the owner.
Yeah, it's the crazy part is I saw this somewhere where of the general managers that have re-signed contracts or have been with the team longer than 2016, all but one have had playoff and divisional wins. And that one that hasn't is general manager Chris Greer. Eric, coach, your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I think when you talk about, setting a culture, I think it does go beyond just even the locker room. I think it's something that you do organizationally. And I think that something the Panthers have done remarkably well since Zito came in is they've been really disciplined in the way that they built this thing. Ethan, you mentioned that they have ownership that's willing to spend money, but that doesn't mean that they've been irresponsible with the way that they've spent their money. They've very clearly had a long-term vision and they've stuck with it. Whereas it kind of feels like with Chris Greer, since Stephen Ross has taken over, I might have this long-term vision, but here's an Ndamukong Suh. Here's a Mike Wallace. Here's a Jalen Ramsey. Here's a Tyreek Hill. You're constantly getting distracted by the shiny object. Right. And really that's not what's going to sustain success for you organizationally.
Well, Eric, that's the squirrel philosophy. And here's the other point with the Panthers. Okay. So the Panthers over the last 3 years have made major trade deadline moves. Okay. The primary guy that they got those 3 years was Claude. It didn't work, but they did get to a cup finals. They got guys for their third line. Claude Giroux, who was Philadelphia's captain, okay? Had played for a long time there. He was their captain. He was aging, okay? He was in his late 30s, but he was their captain. Last year, they got Tarasenko, who had won a cup with the Blues, with St. Louis Blues, as their captain. This year, who do they get? Brad Marchand, who's been the heartbeat of right now, I don't know if his heart's still beating, because literally he was at 11 last night, and then he was at Dairy Queen this morning, and that man has not slept for 3 days. He literally is the greatest troll of all time. I thought Jimmy Butler was a good troll. He literally put up Instagram posts tonight or yesterday adding every team in the league that gave the Panthers one of their players, and then taking snapshots of all of them. And he also wore an Oilers suck shirt today. So this was the
better troll than Tyreek for sure. Better troll than
well, because he's not negative. And see, that's the difference. And see, this is the thing, okay? They've gone out and gotten high character guys who were voted captain by their, and that's really hard to do in hockey. Like in hockey, like if you're not playing through, like, I mean, look what Chuck just played with, literally his groin pulled away from his body. Okay. Barkov played with a split, okay, in his hand after hurting in the game one. These guys, like, if you earn their respect as captains, okay, and so that's the kind of players that Zito has gone for to add to this group. Whereas the Dolphins, they add Tyreek, who has had issues. They add Jalen Ramsey, who, again, worked out for a little bit, but then you saw this kind of thing flare up. It does, and they've added guys who've been injured and missed a lot of time also, whereas the Panthers have gone out and added warriors. And I just kind of feel like, and I speak as someone who covers the Heat primarily, and the Heat have gotten away from it too, by the way. Okay, as I know, Eric, you follow them closely. Like that is they've gotten away from it too. But that's what you have. That's where you have to be. And the Dolphin organization has to look at this and say, look, that's the type of player we need to add. Maybe we'll give up a little talent for some toughness, okay, and get the right guys in this room, because I don't think it's just that the winning led to the chemistry here. I think the chemistry, these guys holding each other accountable, going through that playoff run, being down 2-0 to Toronto in that series. The fourth line saved them against Toronto. And in the last game, Maurice, who's done a masterful job with them, okay, Maurice said he had the fourth line out there. He sent the fourth line out when they won the cup, or the last few seconds, because he wanted them, because he says, you guys got us there. You got us past Toronto. Again, I like Mike McDaniel. I believe in him, his intelligence and his humor and all that kind of stuff. I don't see him having the kind of handle on his team that Paul Maurice has on his. And I think that's something else that has to be rectified this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, sitting here and listening to this and, trying to, hear what the Panthers have done, the Dolphins can do as well. Like you guys have talked about, the discipline, the culture, acquiring those role players, having a long-term vision, finding those high character guys that were captains on their team, building a team that has chemistry. So when we're talking about culture, and that's obviously something the Dolphins have, talked about again in 2025 and have said they lied about it in 2024. Is there a way to see that culture before you reach the top? Like, are there signs that you saw with the Panthers or with the Heat back in the day that you could see that culture building up before they won their championship? Or is that just one of those buzzwords that, everybody's going to use, everybody's going to say they're trying to build a better culture until they reach that championship, and then they're like, hey, the culture changed.
We have it. Right. Well, I think, Coach, I think you made a good point there, because I think we've seen this with the Heat a little bit, where Heat culture has gone from kind of something to brag about to something that was bragged about too much. And, when they put it on the court, and most disciplined, hardest working, toughest, meanest, and the players are not showing that, okay, then it sort of becomes a joke, to be honest. And I think that's kind of what it became a little bit with the Heat. They lose their last 2 playoff games by a combined 92 points. Is that culture, or what was culture having, LeBron, Dwayne, and Chris on the floor at the same time? Now, I do think what the Heat sort of meant by it was they found a lot of these undrafted guys, similar to what Forsling has become for the Panthers. They found these undrafted guys, the Haslams of the world. Like UD is culture, okay? That he embodies it. Zoe, even though he was a number 2 overall pick, was culture. That's kind of where it was set, but they're not there right now. Okay, they're not. I think Bam has some of those qualities, but the rest of the team, it's tough to see it sometimes. But I think with the Panthers, I really think the move was the Huberdeau for Kachuk move. I feel like it all kind of goes back to there, and that embodies everything. It's taking a smart risk for the right guy. That's what that was. That was being willing to trade. And the Heat have been criticized for this too, that they won't trade Tyler, or they won't trade this guy, they won't trade that guy. Well, Zito comes in and he's like, Huberdeau's good. He's really good. He's a 100-point guy. But we're not going anywhere with this. We're too small. We're fast, but we're not. This is not playoff hockey. Kachuk comes in. We're going to sacrifice a little of that skill and that skating, but we're going to get somebody who's going to get in your face, okay, and annoy the hell out of the other team. And he's going to be there all the time. And then look how that shows up. And I think people took their lead from him. And I think he was necessary because Barkov is tremendous as a captain, but he's quiet. And so, he's like Bam a little bit. And so they needed kind of this other figure who was going to sort of get in your face. He's the one that's on the Pat McAfee show. He's the one, and then I feel like that was the real starter for this. And I think when they point to it, that was the turning point. They don't want to trash Huberdeau in retrospect. So I think that's why it doesn't come up quite as much, but that's really what turned it. And, you see it, like people look at Kachuk as a pretty boy. He's not. Like he plays through pain. He plays hard. He gets in your face. I think for the Dolphins, like when I think of culture players on their roster, like I think Jalen Phillips is a culture player. Like I think Jalen Phillips cares. He plays hard. He does the community stuff. He's great. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. Like that's the thing. I mean, I think if you can find people with the character of Jalen Phillips, I think that's what you're looking for.
I think the Dolphins this offseason have tried their best to get high character, high intelligence players. James Daniels, for one, they found a guy in Zach Sealer who's probably one of the better who is one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL. Cater Kohu as a UDFA, decent enough slot corner who can play two-way inside. The issue is that the Dolphins took risks. They did the Los Angeles Rams strategy of F them picks. Let's go get good guys, get good skilled guys, and talent should win on the field. But they didn't realize that, that talent, those guys are divas. They want the ball. Sure, they can say they'll get scrappy, but when all hell is breaking loose, you're not getting scrappy. You don't see Tyreek getting scrappy. Jalen Ramsey, you see him getting scrappy here and there and playing hard till the final whistle. He has some injuries, but now he's more of a me guy than a team guy. And I would say that's what we're seeing from Tyreek Hill. They're trying to get these scores, the Dominican Sues, the Mike Wallaces.
But Hussam, this is my concern. This is my concern looking at this year, right? So, and as far as it's not their fault, it was circumstantial. But like, who were two of the highest character guys on the team last year? Taron Armstead and Calais Campbell, right? Yeah. We all agree on that. Like, if you're looking at two of the highest character people on that team, they're not here anymore. I mean, Armstead's retired, obviously. Look what he played through last year, and he was getting criticized by the fans as he was doing it. And I understand availability is a big thing, no question about it, okay? And they drafted his replacement and all that. But you can't argue that he's not a high character guy. Calais Campbell, the highest character that you could possibly find, right? And so I think Jonnu Smith has shown some of those qualities since he's been there. And now they're in a contract dispute with him. So I think this is the issue. It's like, look, first thing, I want to be clear on something. It's harder in the NFL because you got more spots to fill, okay? And it's harder to create team in the NFL, I think, because the way that the contracts are structured, where guys are literally competing for each other's money. Now, I know there's criticism of the NBA and MLB and NHL to a certain degree, although the NHL numbers are lower and there's a salary cap. But there's criticism of those because, well, these guys can go in and they don't have to play hard. But the reality is they're not really – once they get their money, they get their money. They're not competing. But NFL guys, like, you're in the same position group and, like, you're going after another man's bread, okay? And it makes it harder sometimes, I think, to build the kind of camaraderie. Like, where you have a situation with the Panthers right now where they're all talking about – and people talk about Ross's organization this way, by the way, too. They were all talking about how well the Panthers are taken care of and the food and the plane and all that kind of stuff. And so, but I've never heard those complaints about the Dolphins. Their practice facility is state of the art, just like the Panthers is new and state of the art. So that's all positive. But I think that with the Panthers, there is a feeling that they're all in it together. And you saw that. They wanted to win for each other. And that came across.
I think that point you come across, especially with the money, is very interesting because the Panthers, they won with elite two-way players and guys sacrificing personal stats for team wins. We have not seen that from the 2023 Dolphins and the 2024 Dolphins. The Panthers didn't need Sasha Barkov to score every night. He killed penalties, won faceoffs, controlled the tempo. The Dolphins need to apply that to someone like Tyreek. How does he contribute when the deep shot isn't there? Last season,
I mean, you contribute by blocking. You contribute by doing those other kind of things. But I'm saying but this is what I'm saying. I think it's harder in the NFL because it's more positions, more players, more guys going after each other and money. I'm not going to question that at all. But you talk about it with the Panthers. It's well known. They have $19 million under the cap to spend this offseason, okay? They've got 3 premium free agents. And the NHL money is not as big as the NBA, right? MLB, obviously. But, they got 3 premium free agents, Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad, all right? Those guys are literally going for each other's dollars to that degree. And yet you saw them propping each other up. And I just think there is a mentality with the Dolphins, and it's been there for a long time, if it's kind of I'm for me and me for I, and that's all. And I think that has to change. And that's kind of what we talked about. That's kind of what was talked about with McDaniel and, sort of wanting to be everybody's friend. Again, that's his personality. That's how he's connected to players. You can't ask him to change completely. All right. You also don't necessarily want a coach who's a hard ass in every way, like Brian Flores. You have to sort of thread the needle there. And see, I asked Maurice, I asked Maurice during the Cup final, because Sam Bennett was in, and I said, because Bennett said every man in that room respects him, and you can feel it. Okay. And I asked Maurice, I said, how did you earn that? And, he's like, well, that's very nice of him to say. And he says, I tell them the truth. He's like, I tell them the truth. Sometimes with a bad joke, but I tell him the truth. And I just think that he has, maybe it's, look, Paul Maurice has been through the wars. He's played on, I think he's coached, 5 different franchises. He was with Carolina a long time. He's the losingest coach in NHL history. So he has the scars, okay? But he also, I think, understands, okay, when a guy needs to be picked up or not picked up, and there's that respect level there. And Mike's going to have to earn that quickly this year with this group. Spoelstra has it with the Heat because he's won. That's the thing. It's not because Spo is a hard ass. Spo's seen as a genuinely good human being who cares about his players. But I don't see the connection typically between Spo and his players that I saw between Maurice and his players this year. It's just that, then we saw it break down completely with Jimmy Butler when Jimmy, Spo was one of the biggest reasons Jimmy was happy in Miami. And then he turned against Spo, and Spo took it personally, which I understood what he did. But Mike has to find a way to get these guys to buy in to him.
And I think that comes with experience too. And coach, you can speak a lot to this. Like in the locker room, obviously, I personally don't think Mike McDaniel can be the guy that Paul Maurice is. Yes, there needs to be a certain level of accountability. How do you go from being, a player-friendly coach to someone who is accountable? Like it can be seen as a whole 180, whole twist, and then you say you want to change the culture, but it's too rapid, it's too fast. How do you control that and create that environment for this 2025 season to make it become successful?
Yeah, a couple things on that. And, coming off of the back of having our Richmond Webb interview, I think that's a really good topic because, number one, Richmond Webb talked about, with both Don Shula and Jimmy Johnson, just being consistent. Like he didn't say that obviously those two were more yellers than what Mike McDaniel is, but that's not what Richmond talked about. He talked about them being consistent, and you knew it, you were getting from day to day. So even though McDaniel doesn't have that, alpha dominant personality, I think that if the players, expect the same thing every day, right? Whatever the consequences are, the fines or the discipline, as long as that's consistent, right, then I think that you'll earn the respect of the players as long as you stick to your guns in that regard. And then the other side of it too, when we asked Richmond how he would do playing for a coach like McDaniel compared to the other coaches, he was very clear that, he believed in the player-coach relationship, and he felt that he could play for any coach because he would respect somebody in that position. So I think a big part of it is that you need to get those guys on the team that have that that belief, especially when you have somebody like McDaniel. You have to have the head coach, the coaching staff. They can't do it all. You have to get the leaders in the room. And you guys talked about sometimes you have to take a little bit of a step down in talent to get the right guys in there. And that's what you need to do, is get those right guys in there so that, when things do get a little bit of rocky, you have a core of players that's going to keep everybody on the same page. I think we saw that a little bit with some of the moves that we've seen this offseason. Some of the guys that have gone out, we've seen them openly question coordinators or question the head coach and things like that. We've seen those guys move out. Obviously, you can't do that with all of them every year, but I think that if you look at the 2025 roster, obviously there are still questions with the roster overall. But I think that if you were to go through the 2024 roster and go through and put a check mark by guys that, if shit hits the fan, like, is this a guy that can be an issue? I think the number of players on that 2024 roster compared to what's on the 2025 roster, I think you're moving in the right direction with that.
Well, and I think for that, and then I'll run to Eric on this. I think for that, again, something else that the Panthers did, like, there was one story about how I think Seth Jones it was about, who came in and he was doing things a certain way in warmups, and Barkov was like, the first day was like, we don't do that here,
right?
Like, we don't do. And Barkov's not the type to get in your face, but it was like with clear, like, we don't do that here, okay, and fall in line. And you have to have that, but that relationship has to exist, not just where the players respect that captain or those leaders, but the coach also has the relationship with those leaders, because sometimes it can go the other way. And we've seen entire leadership committees be cast out by the Dolphins in one offseason because the coach didn't like the way that they were leading. And this is, again, it is harder. I always give the Dolphins a little grace on this because it is harder in an NFL room. There's just so many more players. And so you're going to have different personalities and all that, but there has to be a level of accountability from the top. We saw it fall apart with the Heat this year. It's one of the reasons they felt they had to get rid of Jimmy, because Jimmy wasn't going to shoot-arounds. Jimmy wasn't flying on the same plane. Jimmy wasn't doing this. And Bam's the captain, but Bam has no control over what Jimmy's doing. Spo had no control over what Jimmy was doing. And ultimately, Riley and the Harrisons didn't have any control over what Jimmy was doing. And then it just became completely untenable. And that's that I feels like with Tyreek, to a certain degree, that's happened. And maybe it was going on behind the scenes with Ramsey and others. And that has to be cleaned up. I mean, I feel like the Dolphins of the late 90s, okay, teams I covered, which, again, were flawed in some ways offensively, but there was respect between the top players on the team, okay? Jason, Zach, the late Junior Seau when he was in there, Tim Bowens, like, nobody crossed Timbo. Like, there was, Pat, Sam, and even I remember when they brought in A.J. Feely, when Spielman brought in A.J. Feely to be the quarterback in 2002, I guess it would have been, right? And basically, for all the criticisms of Jay Fiedler, Zach and Jason went into Wannstedt's office and said, you need to play Jay, okay? Because we respect Jay, because Jay plays through stuff, okay? And Jay doesn't complain. And there has to be sort of a connection between the leadership on the team. And that's, again, the Panthers, it's clear, like, that team has it like no other team I've seen, honestly. But, the Heat, the Big Three era, they had fractures and all that kind of stuff. But this team is special. I'm not saying the Dolphins are going to be that, but they got to be better than they've been, for sure.
Ian, I think the common thread that you see here, Hussam, you mentioned with the Rams, the one thing I kept thinking when you mentioned the Rams and the differences between how they did it and how the Dolphins were trying to do it is Aaron Donald. Matthew Tkachuk, when he gets brought in, it's not just that he is that leader and he has that attitude about him. It's that he's the loudest voice in the room as well. You can have a lot of high culture guys. Calais Campbell, really high culture guy, fantastic guy. Tyreek Hill is the loudest voice in that locker room last year.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gets the most influence as well. So it's also bringing in guys that have that confidence about them, that much like, Paul Maurice mentioned, he's going to tell his players the truth. You need that from your leaders as well. And that's when you start to get that kind of accountability holding, and you start to build those kinds of things. It's not just that you need to have those high culture guys. They need to be the guys that are the loudest in the room as well.
The other quote from Maurice that really stuck out to me during the playoffs was he said, I have not had, in 3 years he's been here, not one time has a guy knocked on his door to ask about his ice time. Not one time. Okay. I mean, do you think that's been the case for McDaniel? Right? Okay. About snap counts or receiver touches or running back touches or any of that kind of stuff.
The plays, how fast you're getting the plays.
And it wasn't the case for Spo last year either, because on the very first day of training camp, I was in the Bahamas and Jimmy was calling his agent on the first day of training camp because he was like, why is the offense running through Tyler? I mean, that's not going to work. That's why Dwayne Wade, when he came in and got his statue, said a house divided will not stand. Okay, that can't happen. There has to be sacrifice. It has to start either with respect for the top players or respect for the coach. Look, LeBron fell in line in Miami because Dwayne and UD set the culture, okay? There was a certain way they did things. It even went down to talking to the media. LeBron talked to the media twice a day. Why? Because Dwayne did, right? Jimmy talked once a week, took his shirt off, okay, at the podium, okay, because there was no accountability. There's nobody to hold him accountable. There has to be, and we saw this with Tyreek too, there has to be some level of accountability that's set from the top, leadership and all that. And that is, like I said, that's something that, McDaniel has a challenge on his hands. There's no question about it. And when the other thing is, and I think you guys know this, when the players know that a coach doesn't necessarily have the long-term support of the organization, that's really problematic. And that's one of the reasons Spo's been able to survive, because he could go 0-82. The Heat are not firing him. Okay.
Final thought, Ethan.
Right?
Yeah. Final thought, Ethan. If you had to put a message on the Dolphins whiteboard today after watching what the Panthers just did, they've been to the Panthers organization last offseason. McDaniel had been to the Heat organization 2 off seasons ago. What would that whiteboard say, and how can the Dolphins make it their own to be successful like the Heat and the Panthers?
Well, I mean, I think you just show the joy of the celebration, to be honest, and you show the way that they were all celebrating for each other. I feel like all that. I mean, but you could also show Barkov's hand. I don't really you don't really need to show Kachuk's groin, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you could show to indicate that they were in this for each other. There's a certain toughness level that they showed, the love they had for Bob as the goaltender. All of that, and it's just a common camaraderie. And again, look. It can be a little cheesy sometimes because if you don't have players, it doesn't matter. But also, if you have players but you don't have the other, it doesn't matter either. It kind of one leads to the other, and I think that's kind of what needs to happen here. Is there needs to be, again, a breakdown of, okay, who are our leaders? Who do we want to follow? Who are we going with? But then, like you say, well, Zach Sealer is a terrific story, and he's like a Panther story. He's like a Heat story for sure. But now there's a contract situation with him, and that makes it complicated. And that's why these things, you need to take care of the right guys so it doesn't get to that. And so that you can establish these are our guys we're going forward with and we're going to follow them. And again, that has not always happened. The players, the inability of players to get to second contracts with the Dolphins, a whole bunch of things that have happened over the years. Like these are trends that need to change for sure.
Take care of your own. Find your pain, play through it. I think that's what the Panthers did. That's what the Heat done for years. It's not chasing perfection. It's embracing the grind. The Dolphins have had the talent. They just need the scars, and they all need to fight through it and be all in together. Ethan J. Skolnick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
follow him at Ethan J. Skolnick.
Follow all their work, by the way. Hussam is responsible for some of the stuff on the I used a word the other day I would never use on the Twitter account, but it is fun. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Check out 5 Reasons Sports for more on all things South Florida. Stick with us here on Scouting the Fins, part of the 3 Yards Per Carry Network, podcast network. As always, go Fins.
Thanks for watching the 5 Reasons Gambling Show with Big Picks Energy. Secure the value, yeah. Secure the value, yeah.